I stood there in the dark, the phone still pressed to my ear, the weight of the detective's words sinking in like lead. Your son-in-law. It's about him. We need you down here, Mrs. Clark. It's urgent. My hand shook as I dropped the receiver, my heart racing. Greg? The man who smiled at my dinner table, who I treated like family, was now the center of a criminal investigation. How had I not seen it? After all these years, after trusting him with everything, I had become the last to know. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The phone rang at 12:17 a.m. Marjorie Clark blinked awake in the dark, heart pounding with the sudden clarity only fear could bring. Her bedroom was still, the hum of the old radiator, the faint tick of the wall clock, but the phone's shrillness sliced through everything. She reached for it, hand trembling. Unknown number. Hello? Her voice cracked, dry from sleep. Mrs. Clark? A man's voice asked, calm but firm. This is Detective Paul Rivera with the Denver Police Department. I'm sorry to call so late, but we need you to come down to the precinct. It's about your son-in-law. It's important. She sat up straighter, the weight of that word, son-in-law, hitting her like a dropped brick. Greg? She managed, breath catching. What happened? I can't discuss details over the phone, ma'am. But I assure you, you're not in trouble. We just need to speak with you in person. Can you come in? Marjorie rubbed at her eyes, already climbing out of bed. Give me 15 minutes. Downstairs, she buttoned her cardigan over her nightdress, hands clumsy. The house creaked as she moved, old bones talking to each other. She paused at the hall mirror. The woman staring back looked ghost pale, sharp lines across her forehead and mouth, hair pulled back in a loose bun. Still sharp, still standing. She reached for her purse, then paused and picked up her notepad from the kitchen counter. It was habit, decades of bookkeeping. Everything had a record. As she opened the front door, a porch light flicked on across the street. Then came the unmistakable shuffle of slippers. Where the hell are you going at this hour? Came Helen Brooks's voice, half whisper, half demand. Her best friend stood at the edge of her walkway, arms crossed over her robe like a neighborhood sentry. Marjorie hesitated. Police called. About Greg. Helen's face stiffened. You're not driving. I said you're not driving. I'll get the keys. She turned back into her house without waiting for a reply. Marjorie watched her go, her gut tightening. The night felt strange, like the air was holding its breath. They drove in silence at first, the hum of Helen's aging Honda filling the car. Outside, Denver glowed under a soft cloud cover, streetlights casting long shadows on cracked sidewalks. Marjorie stared. Ahead, her mind racing. What the hell did Greg do? Helen finally asked, eyes fixed on the road. I don't know, Marjorie murmured, voice low. But it's not a car accident. The detective sounded careful. Helen glanced over. Careful how? Like he knew something I didn't. Like he was walking around something sharp. Helen grunted. That slimeball's always been slick. Laura never wanted to hear it. Marjorie didn't respond. She was thinking about the time Greg offered to help her with online banking, about the way he always smiled too wide when asking to borrow her car, about the unopened envelopes she'd found tucked under his junk mail. She had seen things, little things, things she'd told herself to ignore. At the precinct, fluorescent lights buzzed above linoleum floors. The night desk officer barely glanced at them before buzzing them in. Detective Rivera was waiting in a small conference room, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, mid-40s, lean, tired eyes. He stood as Marjorie entered. Mrs. Clark, thank you for coming. He gestured to a seat. Miss Brooks, you're welcome to stay. Helen sat with her arms folded like she was daring anyone to tell her otherwise. Rivera pulled a slim file from a folder and laid it on the table in front of Marjorie. Her breath caught when she saw the name typed at the top, Gregory Thomas. Before I go further, he said gently, I need you to know you're not a suspect in any of this. But your name has come up in an ongoing investigation. Marjorie's voice was steady. What kind of investigation? Financial fraud, Rivera said, specifically involving forged checks, misuse of elder accounts, and attempted identity-based credit application. She stared at the file. And Greg is? Rivera gave a slow nod. A primary person of interest. Helen let out a sharp breath, but Marjorie didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on the papers in front of her. the quiet hum of the lights above suddenly deafening. Rivera opened the file and turned a page. We've matched several transactions to accounts in your name. Did you authorize these? He slid one of the documents forward. Marjorie leaned in slowly. Her signature was there. Almost her signature. Tilted too far left, a hesitation in the J she never made. Her throat felt like sandpaper. No, she said. I didn't write this. I didn't sign this. Rivera nodded once. That's what we needed to know. The detective leaned back in his chair, eyes steady. Mrs. Clark, we believe your son-in-law has been stealing from you, and we think it's just the beginning. Marjorie looked down at the forged signature again. Her hands were calm on the table, but inside, something cold and sharp had just taken root. Detective Rivera slid another sheet toward Marjorie. This one wasn't just a forged signature. It was a full copy of a personal check. The account number was hers. The bank was hers. The handwriting, unmistakably not hers. But the name written in the pay to the order of line? Gregory Thomas. Jesus Christ, Helen muttered, standing halfway up from her chair. That bastard wrote himself checks from your account? Rivera held up a calming hand. There's more. He flipped open a manila folder and laid out a clean printout. Columns of transactions, dates, check numbers, amounts. Some were small, $78.45, $121.32. Others larger, $980, $1,750. We've confirmed 9 checks so far, he said, totaling just under $8,000. They were deposited into a personal account under Greg's name, but the checks themselves are from your checkbook. Or copies of it. Marjorie stared down at the list. Each transaction date sent a chill through her. She remembered some of those days, quiet days, the kind where nothing felt out of place. Sundays spent baking with Sophie, afternoons filing old tax returns just to keep her mind sharp. How did I not see this? She murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Because he didn't hit all at once, Rivera said. He spaced them out, kept the amounts just under thresholds that would flag at the bank. This isn't a smash and grab. It's slow bleeding. Helen was pacing now, arms stiff at her sides. We need to go to Laura. Tonight. Show her this. Rivera turned to her, voice firm but calm. No, you do that. He'll shut everything down. Close accounts, wipe computers, maybe even leave town. Helen opened her mouth to argue, but Rivera raised a single finger. Let us keep the element of surprise. It's how we build cases like this. Marjorie folded her hands tightly in her lap. What else do you need from me? For now? Just cooperation. And maybe a little strategy. Rivera reached into the folder again and handed her a small stack of printed forms. Bank affidavit. We'll need you to officially dispute these transactions. But also, if you can start documenting anything unusual going forward, that would help. Receipts, behavior, even conversations. Marjorie took the papers without hesitation. I've kept records for 40 years. I know how to track things, Helen huffed. He's not even that clever. Just arrogant. Marjorie didn't answer. She was flipping through the transaction sheet again, lips pressed thin. A February withdrawal. $1,200. The same week Sophie had asked why they weren't going out for dinner anymore. She looked up at Rivera. How far back does this go? We're still pulling records. It could be 6 months, could be more. Marjorie's jaw tightened. And my daughter? Rivera's expression shifted, gentle but cautious. That's going to be complicated. Helen stepped closer. Laura's no idiot. She's just blind. She's always covered for him, even when she knew he was a charmer with rotten inside. I don't want her to know yet, Marjorie said quietly. Not until I can look her in the eye and show her facts, not guesses. Rivera nodded. Then we're on the same page. Marjorie slipped the documents into her purse with careful precision. Her hands no longer trembled. Not with fear, at least. Something steadier had taken hold. She stood, smoothing her cardigan. I'll start tonight. Helen looked at her, stunned. Tonight? It's nearly 2 in the morning. Marjorie's eyes were clear now, cold, focused. The longer he thinks I'm sleeping, she said, the better chance I have of watching him slip. Rivera offered a slight smile. That's exactly the attitude that brings cases home. Marjorie turned toward the door, her heels clicking with purpose on the linoleum. Helen scrambled after her. As they reached the parking lot, Helen grabbed her arm. You're going to burn him, aren't you? Marjorie didn't flinch. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. If he used my name, she said. Then I'll use his lies. She slid into the passenger seat and closed the door without another word. The next morning, Marjorie was already seated at the kitchen table when she heard the familiar sound of Greg's key in the front door. It was 8:03 a.m. He walked in like he always did, loud, loose, as if the house belonged to him. A brown paper grocery bag in each hand, sunglasses pushed up on his head. "Guess who's everybody's hero this morning?" he called out. "I got your oat bran, Sophie's yogurt, and even those gross fig bars Laura likes." Marjorie looked up with a small, practiced smile. How thoughtful. Greg leaned over and kissed her cheek like he'd just delivered medicine to a hospital ward. "Gotta take care of my favorite mother-in-law." She met his eyes for a half second, just enough. "You're too good to us," she said softly. He grinned, unpacking the bags with unnecessary flourish. "Well, someone's gotta keep this place stocked. Laura's up to her neck in backlogged reports, and Sophie's always running to debate club or study group." From the hallway, Sophie emerged slowly, ponytail slightly crooked, eyes still puffy from sleep. She watched her father with the distant curiosity of someone watching a stranger play a role in a familiar room. "Hey, kiddo," Greg said cheerfully. "I got your strawberry kefir. Don't say I never listen." "Thanks," she said, voice flat. He ruffled her hair. She didn't flinch, but she didn't smile either. Marjorie rose from her chair. "I'll put these away." Greg stepped aside dramatically. "Of course. You run this place better than I ever could." As he turned his back, Marjorie palmed the grocery receipt from the counter, folded it once, slipped it inside the sleeve of her sweater. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if her fingers weren't starting to memorize this ritual. She placed the receipt in the back pocket of her daily planner once. She was alone in her room, then opened a fireproof binder she'd pulled from the bottom of her closet that morning. One side was already filling, photocopies of forged checks, bank letters, a handwritten timeline in her neat, precise script. She slid the new receipt into a fresh sleeve. The groceries Greg bought never cost more than what he stole. He liked small acts of kindness with big price tags, paid for with someone else's wallet. Downstairs, the mood shifted with Laura's arrival. She came through the front door in a rush, laptop bag slung across her shoulder and coffee in hand. "You're amazing," she said to Greg, kissing his cheek. "Seriously, I was going to stop at the store, but you read my mind." Greg beamed like a child handed a gold star. "You married a keeper," he said, winking. Marjorie didn't say a word. "Mom, you okay?" Laura asked, glancing over. "I'm fine," Marjorie replied. "Just a little tired." "You should rest. Greg's going to grill salmon tonight, aren't you, babe?" Greg nodded. "I've got everything handled." Marjorie smiled faintly. "You always do." That night, after the kitchen was cleaned and the TV buzzed quietly in the background, Marjorie sat on the edge of her bed and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Elaine Porter," came the voice on the other end, crisp and composed. "Elaine, it's Marjorie Clark." A pause. Then, "Well, this is a surprise. Is everything all right?" Marjorie looked at her reflection in the window, just her outline in the glass, shadowed and still. "I need legal counsel," she said, "preferably before my son-in-law drains what's left of my account." Elaine didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Come by my office tomorrow, noon. Bring every document you have, every receipt. We'll build before we break." Marjorie closed her phone and slipped it under her pillow. She didn't cry, didn't shake. Downstairs she could hear Greg's laugh, fake, forced, too loud, and Laura's softer chuckle, muted with trust. Sophie's footsteps padded across the hallway. She paused outside Marjorie's door but didn't knock. Good, Marjorie thought. Let her listen. She rose, walked to the closet, and pulled the fireproof binder fully into view. She placed it on her nightstand, next to the reading glasses she no longer needed to find truth. The call came just after 10 a.m., while Marjorie was waiting in the front room, binder in hand, coat already buttoned for her meeting with Elaine. "Mrs. Clark?" a young woman's voice asked. "This is Michelle from Fidelity Community Credit Union. I'm calling to follow up on the $25,000 personal loan application submitted in your name yesterday." Marjorie froze mid-step. She cleared her throat. "I didn't apply for any loan." There was a pause, then a nervous shuffle of papers over the line. "Ma'am, we flagged the application due to a mismatch in verification, some ID inconsistencies, and an outdated phone number. That's standard protocol. We're required to call the listed primary account holder. Marjorie stepped slowly to the desk, writing as the woman spoke. Can you send me the application? She asked calmly. I'll email you the scanned copy right now, but we'll need you to sign a fraud affidavit. It'll come from our fraud department within the hour. Marjorie didn't flinch. Thank you for the call. You may have saved me more than money. Elaine's office smelled like old paper and eucalyptus. The attorney took one look at the printout Marjorie handed her and whistled under her breath. Bold little bastard, isn't he? She muttered, flipping through the pages. Used my full name, Marjorie said, voice flat. My social? He must have lifted my old tax return. I kept it in the file cabinet in the basement. He's been down there twice this month. Elaine sat back in her chair. Well, this escalates things. She reached into her drawer and pulled out a thick set of forms, dropping them between them like a gavel. I'm filing probate and conservatorship defense this afternoon. We're locking your estate down tighter than Fort Knox. If Greg tries anything again, the court will see it as active exploitation, not just financial fumbling. Marjorie nodded slowly. Let them see. Elaine looked her over, then leaned forward. You're not just a victim, Marjorie. You're a witness and a weapon. A rare, humorless smile tugged at Marjorie's mouth. He wants my credit, she murmured. He'll get my case. That evening, Helen sat with her on the back porch, feet tucked under an old plaid blanket, 2 mugs of lukewarm tea between them. The late September wind swept dry leaves across the patio, making the world feel like it was folding in on itself. I'd kill him if it were legal, Helen muttered, watching the sunset bleed into gold and rust. Marjorie chuckled once, low and tired. That's the thing with men like Greg. They count on you getting emotional. That's how they win. We don't need murder. We need paperwork, Helen huffed. I like you better when you're vengeful. I'm always vengeful. Just organized. Helen raised her mug in mock salute. Marjorie sipped her tea, eyes narrowed at the horizon. He thinks no one sees him, but he forgets. Every thief has a pattern, and I know how to read ledgers inside. Sophie was doing homework on the living room floor when Marjorie came back in. She looked up, wide-eyed, like she'd been waiting. Was it bad today? She asked. Marjorie hesitated, then slowly crouched beside her. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Sophie reached forward and wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist, resting her head on her hip. I don't care what Mom says. I know he's not right. Marjorie placed her hand gently on Sophie's head. You're smarter than all of them, you know that? Sophie pulled back slightly. Then why don't they listen? They will, Marjorie said, but only after the damage shows up on paper. Her phone buzzed. A text from Detective Rivera. Loan doc received. Adding to evidence log. DA reviewing for escalation. Marjorie stared at the screen for a long beat. In the other room, she could hear Greg's voice, bragging over the phone to someone about refinancing option. She stood slowly and walked to the kitchen, opened her binder, slipped the new printout in. On the front of the folder, she wrote in neat, unwavering pen, attempted loan, $25,000, September 28th. Then underlined it twice. The letter arrived folded into thirds, tucked inside a plain envelope like it was any other piece of mail. Marjorie knew better. She unfolded it at the kitchen table, hands steady as her eyes scanned the words. Petition for guardianship, filed by Gregory Thomas, citing her deteriorating cognitive state, financial instability, and increasing confusion regarding day-to-day responsibilities. She read it twice, not because she couldn't understand it, but because she wanted to feel every word hit. Sophie watched from the doorway, silent. When Laura arrived home later, Greg's arm casually slung around her waist, Marjorie was already seated on the couch, the letter in her lap. I assume you both got what you wanted, she said quietly. Laura froze. Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. Marjorie didn't blink. You signed it? Laura swallowed. Greg said it was temporary. Just until things calm down. You've been overwhelmed and you looked me in the eye 3 days ago, Marjorie said, voice razor thin, and said I seemed tired. Not unstable, not incompetent, just tired. Greg stepped in. It's for your protection, Marjorie. She turned to him slowly. I don't need protection from the wolves, she said, just from the ones pretending to be family. The hearing was held in courtroom 4B of the Denver County Courthouse. The walls were dull beige, and the air carried the dry chill of a place built for decisions, not comfort. Judge Martin Fields presided. a man with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings and less patience for theatrics. His gray eyebrows arched high as he reviewed the paperwork. Marjorie sat straight, her binder across her lap like a shield. On the other side of the aisle, Greg wore a charcoal gray suit and a performance face. Concerned, attentive, rehearsed. Laura sat beside him, eyes low, lips pressed in a thin line. She couldn't look at her mother. Elaine rose first, sharp in a navy pantsuit, documents neatly stacked before her. "Your Honor," she began, voice crisp, "this petition is not based in concern, it's based in self-preservation. My client, Marjorie Clark, is not mentally unfit. She is not unstable. She is the victim of a prolonged pattern of financial exploitation." Greg shifted in his seat. Elaine continued, sliding 2 sealed folders to the clerk. "We've submitted a full neuropsychological evaluation conducted last week, confirming Mrs. Clark's full cognitive capacity. In addition, we've included a bank audit showing fraudulent activity directly tied to Mr. Thomas." Gasps fluttered from the back row. Someone whispered, "Jesus." Judge Fields raised a hand. "Let's keep it quiet." Detective Rivera took the stand next. His tone was clinical but damning. "Over the past 2 months, we've documented forged checks, an attempted identity theft loan, and deceptive use of financial access, all connected to Mr. Thomas, who resides in the same home as the victim." Greg's attorney objected to the use of the term victim. "Noted," Fields said, without even glancing up. From her seat, Marjorie studied Greg's posture. His shoulders were still wide, but his hands wouldn't stop adjusting his cuffs. It was the first time he'd ever looked too big for his confidence. Elaine stepped forward again. "Your Honor, this petition is not only legally unsound, it's predatory. Mr. Thomas is attempting to gain conservatorship over the very woman he's stealing from." Greg stood abruptly. "That's not true." "Sit down," Judge Fields barked. The courtroom went silent. Laura finally looked at her mother, but there was no apology in her expression. Only fear, torn loyalty. Marjorie didn't flinch. Judge Fields thumbed through the paperwork for an achingly long moment. Then, "I see no grounds for emergency guardianship, and I'm noting, for the record, that the petitioner is under active investigation for financial misconduct against the respondent." He looked directly at Greg. "That means you." Elaine leaned down toward Marjorie, whispering, "That's blood in the water." Marjorie didn't smile, but her fingers tightened around the spine of her binder, and something in her chest, something cold and clenched, finally exhaled. Outside the courtroom, Greg shoved open the exit doors, face red, jaw locked. Laura trailed behind, conflicted, but quiet. Elaine turned to Marjorie. "He overplayed his hand." Marjorie shook her head. "He underestimated me." Behind them, Rivera answered a call from the DA's office. The documents arrived in a thick manila envelope hand-delivered by Rivera 2 days after the hearing. Elaine opened it with a paper knife, like she was cutting into flesh. Marjorie, Helen, and Laura sat around her office table, the air heavy with something more than silent: expectation, dread, maybe truth waiting to rise like smoke from dry wood. Elaine pulled out the first page. "This is the audit." She slid the contents out slowly, page after page of spreadsheet printouts, flagged transfers, overlapping names, and suspicious withdrawals. Red lines circled transactions. Greg's name appeared over and over, tied to accounts that had no business existing, let alone drawing money from Marjorie. Elaine cleared her throat. "He's opened 3 different online betting accounts under his own name, one under an alias, G. Thomas Jr., and another using Sophie's middle name as a decoy. All trace back to his IP address. The gambling started heavy 4 months ago. Online poker, fantasy sports, cryptocurrency staking, unregulated, high-risk nonsense." Laura's face drained of color. "There's no way," she whispered. Elaine passed her a copy. "Your name isn't on any of it. But the cards he used? 2 were registered in your household. One linked directly to your mother's account." Marjorie didn't speak. Her eyes scanned the lines like she was looking at an old balance sheet, except this one smelled of betrayal, not numbers. "There's more," Elaine said. "He applied for an emergency line of credit through a shadow lender, cited elder care expenses, put your mom's name down as a dependent." Helen let out a sound, half laugh, half growl. "He's cornered himself." Laura looked over the documents like she was seeing her husband for the first time. Her voice came out paper thin. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Elaine didn't comfort her. She turned to Rivera, who stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw set. We're feeding this into the affidavit timeline. This, plus the forged checks, plus the loan application. It's enough for the DA to start laying formal fraud charges. Is he going to jail? Laura asked quietly. Rivera didn't answer. Not out of uncertainty, but because the answer didn't matter yet. Back at home, Sophie found Marjorie in the laundry room, folding a bath towel with robotic precision. She'd been quiet since they returned. No anger, no bitterness, just quiet, like a field after a fire. Grandma. Marjorie looked up, eyes slower than usual to meet hers. Are you okay? Marjorie opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded. Sophie stepped closer. Do you want to talk? No, Marjorie said softly. But I will. She pulled her granddaughter into a slow, firm hug. Sophie clung tighter than usual. Marjorie's voice was almost too low to hear. The cracks are showing, sweetheart. Sophie leaned back. What cracks? In his armor. His lies. His house of cards. Sophie swallowed. And when it all falls? Marjorie smoothed her granddaughter's hair back from her face. Then we'll sweep up what's ours and leave him in the mess he made. That night, Helen brought over peach cobbler and bourbon, like she was preparing for a wake. They sat at the kitchen table, Marjorie's binder open between them, pages spilling out with dates and red flags. Elaine's audit notes sat in a neat stack nearby. He'll lash out soon, Helen said, pouring a second splash of bourbon. Men like him never go down quiet. Marjorie circled a date on the timeline. Let him. I'm not scared of the noise. She tapped the folder with a pen. This is louder. Meanwhile, in the garage, Laura sat in her car with the engine off, Elaine's audit report open in her lap, headlights still on, Greg's name circled in red ink again and again and again. From inside the house, she could hear his voice echoing through the hallway, telling someone on the phone that everything's under control. She didn't go inside for another 10 minutes. It happened in the church parking lot of all places. The family had gone to Sunday service. Laura's idea, some brittle attempt at normalcy. Marjorie didn't protest. Neither did Sophie, who stood at her grandmother's side through the entire sermon, unmoving. Greg had put on his best smile, shook hands with every usher, even dropped a 20 in the collection plate. But as they stepped into the cool fall morning and walked toward the car, something in Greg's mask slipped. He grabbed Marjorie's elbow just as Laura and Sophie moved ahead. His grip was subtle, but firm. Too firm. You need to stop, he hissed through clenched teeth, eyes never meeting hers directly. You think you're winning? You think you've got this all figured out? Marjorie didn't pull away. She stood motionless, eyes steady. You don't know what you're doing, he said. You keep poking around, I swear to God, I'll make your life hell. There won't be a binder thick enough to save you. From behind a nearby sedan, Sophie stood frozen, silent, unnoticed. Her fingers moved quickly into the side pocket of her jacket, pulled out her phone, and hit record. Greg's voice dropped lower. You've turned Laura against me. You think Sophie's going to stay on your side when this tears the family in half? You'll be alone, Marjorie. Alone and broke. Marjorie finally spoke, her tone flat. Are you finished? Greg smiled like a cornered animal. Not even close. He let go and turned toward the car, calling over his shoulder. Let's go. Sophie tucked her phone back into her pocket and walked ahead without a word. Later that night, Marjorie sat at Elaine's desk once again, this time with a new USB drive in her hand. Elaine plugged it in without a question. The audio file played through her speakers, grainy, but unmistakable. Greg's voice cut through the room like a blade. There won't be a binder thick enough to save you. Elaine leaned back slowly, arms folded. He threatened you. In public. Clear intent to intimidate a witness. This just became more than financial fraud. She turned to Detective Rivera, seated beside her, notepad already open. He nodded. We'll log it, timestamp it, and get it in front of the DA by morning. Helen, sitting against the far wall, muttered, I'd pay good money to have that played over courtroom speakers. Full volume. Elaine smiled grimly. That's exactly where it's going. That night at home, Laura sat in the living room staring at nothing. Greg was in the backyard talking loudly into his phone, pacing with his usual confidence, making plans like nothing was wrong. Sophie sat on the stairs, legs pulled up to her chest. She didn't look at her mother. Not at first. You heard it, didn't you? Sophie finally asked. Laura's shoulders sagged. Yes. So now what? Laura closed her eyes. I don't know. Sophie stood up, voice quiet but sharp. You do. You're just scared to say it. She left before Laura could answer. Marjorie stood in the kitchen, hand on her binder like it was part of her body now. Helen refilled the kettle behind her. He's getting reckless, Helen said. You saw his eyes today. He knows he's losing. Marjorie didn't look up. Reckless men say too much. Helen placed 2 tea bags in matching mugs. And? Marjorie's voice was barely a whisper. Every word he spits becomes my weapon. Upstairs, Sophie added the audio file to a shared folder titled Clark Evidence, Chain of Custody. She added a description, 10/5, church parking lot, threat intimidation, recorded by Sophie, witness. She paused before closing the laptop, then clicked open another tab and began searching, how to testify in court as a minor witness. They returned to courtroom 4B on a rainy Wednesday morning. This time, there was no petition filed by Greg, only evidence against him. Judge Fields sat behind the elevated bench like a monument, fingers steepled, robe loose, but his gaze razor sharp. Elaine stood with confidence honed by years of battles just like this. Your Honor, she said, placing a flash drive on the clerk's desk. This is audio evidence from October 5th. My client, Mrs. Clark, was threatened with financial and social retaliation by the individual currently under investigation. The voice on the recording is unmistakably Mr. Gregory Thomas. She let that hang in the room. Greg sat 3 rows back, jaw clenched, suit wrinkled. No Laura beside him this. Elaine continued, voice measured. We're requesting a temporary restraining order, immediate removal from the shared household, and preliminary enforcement of civil protection, pending. The results of the fraud investigation. Judge Fields gave the nod to the clerk. The recording played. Greg's voice filled the room again, venomous even through the tinny speakers. There won't be a binder thick enough to save you. Marjorie sat perfectly still. Fields leaned forward. And this was recorded by? Elaine glanced at Marjorie, then at Sophie in the front row. Her granddaughter, 16. Witness. Same residence. Judge Fields exhaled slowly. Well, Mr. Thomas has shown himself to be more than a financial threat. He's emotional leverage with legs. I'm granting the order. The gavel came down. Sharp. Final. Mr. Thomas is to vacate the premises by 6 p.m. today. Law enforcement will escort if needed. No contact with Mrs. Clark or minor dependents for the duration of the investigation. That evening, Greg packed with fury hidden behind shallow breaths. Laura hovered at the doorframe, arms crossed, eyes puffy. She'd said little since the hearing. Her silence was no longer indecision. It was erosion. Where am I supposed to go? Greg snapped, tossing socks into a duffel bag. Laura didn't answer. Seriously, I gave this family everything, half of what's in this damn house I bought. Still nothing. He turned to her, voice dropping. You think this is justice? A witch hunt staged by a bitter old woman and a lawyer who's been waiting her whole life to swing at someone like me? From the stairs, Sophie spoke. The audio's you. No one made you say those things. Greg turned to her sharply, but Sophie didn't flinch. She was recording again. He knew it. He didn't say another word. Marjorie stood in the front room, binder in her arms, watching through the window as Greg slammed the trunk shut. He didn't look back. Helen stepped beside her, arms folded. He'll try again, she said. Somehow. Marjorie nodded once. Let him. Helen looked over. You're not afraid anymore, are you? No, Marjorie said. Now I'm dangerous. At Elaine's office the next morning, civil documents sat waiting. We're filing suit for restitution, Elaine said. Back pay, unauthorized withdrawals, identity misuse. We'll freeze any assets tied to your name and seize any transferred under duress. I already have the affidavit ready. Marjorie didn't blink. File it. Elaine smiled. Didn't think you'd say no. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window, steady and rhythmic. A storm that had passed, but left the streets slick, the air clean. That night, Sophie opened her bedroom window and let the autumn air in. Her phone buzzed with texts from classmates, memes, and gossip, but she ignored them. Instead, she pulled up the shared folder, Clark Evidence, Chain of Custody. She added a new entry, October 9th, TRO granted. Greg removed from home. No contact order filed. She stared at the screen for a moment, then added one more line. He didn't look back. Downstairs, Marjorie locked the binder into her safe for the night. She paused, hand on the handle, then opened the drawer beside it. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed in Greg's handwriting. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. But she would. Marjorie found the newspaper before sunrise, nestled half wet in the front hedges, the plastic sleeve already torn from the wind. Denver man under investigation for elder fraud, exploitation. Gregory Thomas, 46, named in civil and criminal filings. Her name was in the article too. 3 times. Once as a victim, once as a retired bookkeeper, and once as a grandmother who retained legal counsel to preserve her estate. She folded the paper and set it gently on the kitchen table, then sat beside it with her hands folded, staring at nothing. Sophie woke to the sound of footsteps and found her grandmother already dressed, hair pinned back, cardigan buttoned up like armor. "You saw it?" Sophie asked. Marjorie nodded. "It's real now." By noon, the whispers had reached every porch in their neighborhood. A few neighbors passed slower than usual when walking their dogs. One woman, Janine from 3 houses down, knocked on the door with a casserole and a pinched, uncomfortable smile. "I just wanted to say we're thinking of you," she said awkwardly, her eyes darting like moths. "I always thought Greg was, well, charming." Marjorie took the dish. Charm's the first thing predators learn. Janine didn't know what to say after that. At the grocery store, Laura wore sunglasses inside, pushing the cart like it was a shield. She ignored her ringing phone, 4 missed calls from Greg, 2 from a blocked number. She moved quickly through the aisles, eyes down, head buzzing with static. At the checkout line, a woman behind her tapped her shoulder. "I'm sorry, but is your mom Marjorie Clark?" Laura froze. "Yes, she's brave. What's she's doing? It matters." Laura said nothing, just nodded and left before her receipt even printed. Elaine stood at the edge of her office watching the city stretch past her window as Rivera scanned a stack of printed referral paperwork. "We've got everything we need," he said. "Check fraud, elder exploitation, attempted identity theft, plus the intimidation incident. DA's office wants the full package. I'm drafting the handoff today." Elaine crossed her arms. "You'll get a conviction?" "We'll get the process started," Rivera said. "No guarantees in court. But the facts? They're sharp." Elaine turned to her filing cabinet, pulled a fresh folder, and labeled it with black ink, "State of Colorado versus Gregory Thomas." She smiled. "Let him squirm." That evening, Helen brought over 2 slices of lemon cake and a bottle of sparkling cider. Celebration, but restrained. "They printed his name in bold, you know," she said, grinning as she handed Marjorie a plate. "Bottom fold, right on the front page, not tucked away in crime brief. Front." "I saw it," Marjorie said. Helen raised her glass. "Public shame is part of justice." Marjorie didn't toast, just stared out the window as a car passed slowly on the street, brake lights flaring like hesitation. "He always wanted attention," she said finally. "Now he's got it." After dinner, Sophie found Marjorie in the garden, pulling weeds by flashlight. "You don't have to do this right now," Sophie said gently. "It's getting cold." "I know," Marjorie replied, not looking up. "But the weeds don't care." Sophie crouched down beside her and helped, wordless. After a few minutes, Marjorie whispered, "The truth is louder now." Sophie said nothing, just took her grandmother's hand and squeezed it. Inside the house, Laura stood in the hallway outside the guest room where she'd been sleeping since Greg left. Her suitcase sat open, her hand hovered over it. She didn't know if she was packing to stay or to go. A voicemail from Greg lit up her phone screen. "You think they'll really protect you when this goes sideways? They're all bluff. Elaine's bluff. Your mom's bluffing. You think a recording makes you safe?" Laura stared at the message, then deleted it. Marjorie was back at the kitchen table just before bed, unfolding the envelope from Greg she'd found in the drawer days earlier. Inside was a single printed form, "Durable Power of Attorney, Marjorie Clark, Gregory Thomas," dated 4 months prior, unsigned. She ran her thumb over the space where her name should have been. Blank. She closed her eyes, heart quiet but solid. The news came on a Thursday morning, wrapped in something deceptively mundane. A single-page letter from the district attorney's office, stamped and sealed. Elaine was the one who read it aloud in her office. "Grand jury has returned a formal indictment against Gregory Thomas on the following charges: check fraud, identity theft, financial exploitation of an elder, and obstruction of a financial investigation." She glanced up at Marjorie. 4 felonies, 2 misdemeanors, and it's only the beginning. Marjorie sat still in the leather chair across from her, calm as glass. She didn't blink, didn't flinch. Laura, seated beside her, did both. "This is really happening," Laura said, voice tight. Elaine turned the letter toward her. "It's not abstract anymore. His name's in ink now. This will go to court." Laura swallowed hard. "I thought maybe it would stay civil, that we'd just settle." Elaine's voice was cool, professional. "Your husband didn't just make financial missteps. He broke federal and state law." Laura looked at her mother, searching for something. But Marjorie was already reaching into her binder, flipping to a fresh page labeled DA File, Indictment Response. Downstairs, Sophie waited in the lobby with Rivera. He handed her a bottle of water. "You nervous?" "A little," she admitted. "But I practice." Rivera gave a rare smile. "You're doing more than most adults would in your shoes." Sophie took a breath. "I just want it to matter. What I say." "It already does," he said. "Your recording helped push this forward. Now your deposition ties it all together." A court officer opened the door, nodded. Rivera stood. "Let's go make it official." Inside the deposition room, Sophie sat at the long table, hands folded, voice steady. She described the parking lot, the threats, the fear in her grandmother's eyes, the way Greg's tone shifted when he thought no one was watching. "I knew it wasn't right," she said, "so I recorded him, because I didn't want it to be her word against his." The court stenographer didn't react, but the DA's assistant leaned forward slightly, tapping her pen just once. Sophie saw it. She knew what it meant. That afternoon, Helen arrived at Marjorie's with 2 coffees and a headline already pulled up on her phone. "DA confirms indictment in Clark fraud case." She set the phone down and exhaled. "This is bigger than groceries now." Marjorie raised a brow. "It always was." They sat on the porch swing in silence for a moment, wind cutting across the yard like breath through teeth. "You sure you're ready for trial?" Helen asked. "I've been ready since the first forged check," Marjorie replied. "The courtroom's just the last ledger to balance." Back at Elaine's office, Rivera reviewed the full case file for the criminal division. "This is clean," he said. "Tight timeline, witness corroboration, paper trail thicker than a phone book." Elaine gestured to the growing evidence folder. "I'm preparing a parallel motion, civil restitution under Colorado's elder abuse statute. If we get the verdict, we'll push for full recovery of every cent, plus damages." Rivera grinned. "You don't let up, do you?" "I never did," Elaine said. "Greg just picked the wrong damn grandmother." Laura didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table long after the lights went out, flipping through old photos. Sophie in kindergarten, Greg at their wedding, her mother's 70th birthday last spring. In one picture, Greg had his hand on Marjorie's shoulder, smiling, relaxed, like nothing in the world could ever catch up to him. Laura stared at it until her eyes blurred, then tore it in half. In Sophie's bedroom, a new email arrived in her inbox from elaine.porter@lawfirmco.com. Subject: Your official testimony. Confirmation. Sophie, thank you for your brave participation in today's deposition. You'll be called as a witness if we proceed to trial. Let me know if you need anything or have questions. Elaine. Sophie read it twice, then opened her laptop and added a new line to the evidence log. October 12th. Grand jury indictment filed. GT charged with elder fraud, plus exploitation. She clicked save, then closed the screen and sat quietly in the dark, listening to the night creak around the house. Greg's attorney was exactly what Marjorie expected. Tan suit, slick hair, and a voice trained to condescend without raising its volume. "Mrs. Clark is, respectfully, confused," he told the courtroom. "This is not unusual for someone of her age. We've seen examples where medication, memory lapses, even simple clerical errors can create the illusion of fraud." He gestured toward Marjorie, seated at the plaintiff's table, hands folded calmly over her binder. "Is it possible," he continued, "that some of these checks were authorized during a moment of forgetfulness? That perhaps she approved these withdrawals but now, retrospectively, feels taken advantage of?" Elaine stood without waiting for the judge's prompt. "With all due respect, she said. What Mr. Thomas's defense is suggesting is that a 71-year-old woman, one with a documented history in professional bookkeeping, no cognitive decline, and years of meticulous financial record-keeping, suddenly began misplacing thousands of dollars across multiple forged checks, shadow loan applications, and online gambling accounts. She turned, pacing slowly. Gaslighting is not a defense. It's another form of abuse. There was a subtle murmur from the public gallery. Judge Fields raised a hand. Let's stay focused on evidence. Elaine nodded, gladly. Detective Rivera took the stand again. He was clean-cut today, in a charcoal gray suit and a blue tie, just enough polish for court. Not enough to look like a politician. He spoke plainly, clearly. We traced digital account logins to Mr. Thomas's home IP address. Security camera footage confirms ATM withdrawals in his physical presence. Phone records link him directly to communications with shadow lenders. He paused. We also reviewed Mrs. Clark's bank activity for 5 years prior. No signs of instability, no overdrafts, no confusion, no irregularities, until Mr. Thomas began managing her online accounts. The defense attorney attempted to object, but Judge Fields waved him off. The highlight came when Elaine played Sophie's audio recording again, this time in full. Greg's voice hissed through the speakers. You keep poking around, I swear to God, I'll make your life hell. There won't be a binder thick enough to save you. No one in the room moved. Elaine turned to the jury box. That's not a confused grandmother. That's a predator losing control. Laura sat in the second row of the gallery, hands gripping the edge of the bench. She had come alone today. And for the first time, she didn't flinch when Greg's name was spoken. She didn't check her phone. She didn't look toward the defense table. She just stared at her mother who had not once raised her voice, cried, or collapsed under pressure. Marjorie sat as if the whole thing had been predicted from the start. Her silence was louder than any testimony, her stillness, a challenge. Elaine called no theatrics. She didn't need to, because the weight of the truth was already doing the work. When the recess was called, the courtroom slowly emptied, but Helen stayed behind, one hand still gripping Marjorie. She hadn't let go since the recording played. Doesn't matter what the lawyer says, she whispered. They heard it. They heard him. Marjorie nodded once. Now it's on record. Helen gave a small, bitter laugh. He tried to paint you as unstable. But it's him unraveling. Marjorie looked ahead, eyes steady. He's always been unraveling. He just thought no one was watching outside the courthouse. A local news van had parked beside the sidewalk. The reporter didn't call out, didn't wave her microphone, just watched quietly as Marjorie exited the building, binder in one hand, Sophie walking beside her. The sun was high, clear, nothing left to hide. The courtroom was colder than usual, air cranked too high, as if trying to cool a room brimming with tension. State of Colorado versus Gregory Thomas, the clerk read aloud. Greg sat stiff at the defense table in a navy blue suit that seemed too tight at the collar, like it had been tailored for a man who hadn't yet been caught. His eyes flicked toward the jury box, then toward the prosecution table, where Elaine stood with her exhibits neatly stacked, her expression unreadable. The trial had begun. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Kate, opened the case with methodical precision. Today, she said, you will hear a story of financial fraud. Not the kind you read about in corporate scandals or offshore accounts, but something quieter, more insidious, a man who exploited the trust of family to bleed someone dry while smiling across the dinner table. She pointed to the evidence table, forged checks, a digital audit trail, copies of loan applications, all leading back, she said, to that man right there. Greg shifted slightly in his seat. Elaine rose next. She began not with drama, but with arithmetic. Let's look at the numbers, she said, passing printed ledgers to the jury. 9 checks forged, 4 online transfers rerouted, 1 fake loan attempt, 3 credit inquiries without consent, and $28,642 unaccounted for. Until we followed the trail to Mr. Thomas's personal gambling accounts. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her filled with side-by-side screenshots. Marjorie's bank activity next to Greg's betting deposit. Evidence doesn't blink, Elaine said. It just waits for someone to notice. Sophie was the first witness to take the stand. She wore a navy blouse and black jeans, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She didn't fidget. She didn't stammer. I saw him grab her arm in the parking lot, she told the jury. He told her there wouldn't be a binder thick enough to save her. And why did you record it? The prosecutor asked gently. Sophie looked directly at Greg. Because I didn't think anyone would believe it otherwise. Greg turned his gaze down to the table, jaw clenched. The recording played again, this time in the presence of a jury. No one moved. Laura was called next. She hesitated at the witness stand, just long enough to betray the conflict still living inside her. But when she sat, her voice was steady. Yes, she said. Greg pressured me not to ask questions. He said my mom was slipping. He said he was helping. And did you believe him? Laura's throat tightened. I wanted to. She glanced toward her mother, seated near Elaine, binder closed in her lap. But everything started going quiet. Bills weren't where they used to be. Passwords were changed. Greg always had an excuse. But my mother never did things in silence. She tracked everything. She always has. Why didn't you stop him? Laura blinked hard. Because I thought trusting him meant I was being loyal. I didn't understand that loyalty without truth is just blindness. Elaine stood to cross-examine Greg. He looked composed. At first, she asked about the ATM withdrawals, the check signatures, the emergency credit application citing elder medical costs. Each question was punctuated with document, time-stamped printout, screenshots, notarized letters, and then, you claim Marjorie Clark is confused, correct? Yes, Greg said carefully. Elaine walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled out one more exhibit, a birthday card, signed by Marjorie 6 months prior. Can you explain how a confused woman manages to not only balance her books, but send your daughter's college fund exact interest statements quarterly? Greg's silence lasted too long. Sweat gathered at his temple. I don't recall, he said finally. Elaine tilted her head. No further question. Marjorie hadn't spoken once. She sat quietly, watching Greg unravel not in rage, but in slow denial. Her binder remained closed, untouched. The jury watched her too. She didn't need to speak. She'd already said enough. On paper, in silence, in resilience. The courtroom was silent when the foreman stood. Greg's attorney had stopped scribbling notes 5 minutes ago. Elaine didn't blink. Marjorie sat with her hands clasped, her binder still closed, untouched for the entire trial. We, the jury, the foreman read, find the defendant, Gregory Thomas, guilty on all counts. A low gasp passed through the gallery. Judge Fields didn't move, only adjusted his glasses, then turned toward the defense table. Mr. Thomas, you have been found guilty of check fraud, financial exploitation of an elder, identity theft, and obstruction of a financial investigation. You are hereby sentenced to 5 years supervised probation, full restitution totaling $32,186.75, and a lifetime financial power restriction. You are permanently barred from holding fiduciary authority over any person other than yourself. He paused, letting that settle. And you are not to have direct or indirect financial contact with Marjorie Clark for the rest of her life. Greg sat frozen, lips parted like he still hadn't figured out what part of the performance went wrong. The courtroom recessed slowly, like a storm cloud draining rain. Elaine packed the evidence folders with crisp efficiency. Marjorie hadn't moved. Sophie rushed to her first. She didn't say a word, just wrapped her arms around her grandmother's shoulders and held her fiercely, tighter than ever before. You did it, she whispered. We did it. Marjorie didn't nod. She didn't need to. Her hand simply came up, resting over Sophie's. Her fingers trembled, but not from fear. Just release. In the hallway, Laura stood alone near a bench, eyes puffy, face blotched from trying to hide tears that refused to be hidden. When Marjorie passed her, Laura stepped forward quickly. Mom. Marjorie turned, tired but open. I was wrong, Laura said, voice cracking. I saw what I wanted to see. I let him twist everything. I'm so... Marjorie stepped forward and did something she hadn't done in months. She hugged her daughter. Not a long embrace, not tearful, but firm, final. Then she pulled back and met Laura's eyes. You're not the first woman to mistake silence for peace, she said gently, but you have to stop doing it now. Laura nodded, tears sliding down. I will. Helen waited outside, arms crossed over her coat, sunglasses pushed back into her graying hair. As Marjorie exited the building, Helen gave a dry, crooked grin. Well, she said, the wolf didn't get the lamb after all. Marjorie exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Helen leaned closer, voice low. He underestimated the bookkeeper. Marjorie looked up at the pale sky, clouds starting to part above the courthouse dome. Numbers don't lie, she said. Helen raised a brow. And people? Marjorie gave a small, sad smile. People try. But eventually the math catches up. That night the family was quiet. There was no celebration, no champagne, just a fire lit in the living room hearth, a casserole reheated from the freezer, and the hum of something calm finally returning to the walls. Laura sat beside Sophie on the couch, their knees touching. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Sophie nodded. Grandma taught me. Across the room, Marjorie sat in her favorite chair, cardigan wrapped tight, binder finally resting beside the bookshelf, unopened. No longer a shield, just a record, a finished one. Outside, the porch light clicked on with the motion of a neighbor walking by. And for once, Greg's name wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a headline, a file, a closed tab. The safe clicked shut with finality. Marjorie turned the dial slowly, left, then right, then left again. Inside were the labeled folders: loan attempt, check forgeries, Clark evidence, chain of custody, trial transcripts. The binder sat on top, pages smoothed flat. A record of harm, of resistance, of every detail that tried to vanish but didn't. She touched the metal handle once more before closing the closet door. Downstairs, the house was quiet. No Greg. No thudding footsteps. No half-fake laughter echoing down the hall. Just the steady tick of the old wall clock. The smell of toast. The faint whistle of wind through the trees. Laura came by around noon, carrying a brown paper bag and 2 coffees. She didn't knock. She didn't need to anymore. I brought the apple pastries from Garden Street, she said. You used to like those. Marjorie raised an eyebrow. Used to? Laura gave a sheepish smile. Okay. Still. Like. They sat at the kitchen table. No binder between them now, just flaky pastry crumbs and cups slowly cooling in their hands. I check the accounts every morning now, Laura said. Double verify every charge. Sophie's helping me get organized. Marjorie nodded. It's a good habit. Laura looked down. I still dream about it sometimes. Him. The trial. You. Sitting there so calm while I was trying not to fall apart. Marjorie sipped her coffee. The trick isn't staying calm. It's deciding who deserves your panic. Laura's eyes welled. I wish I'd seen him sooner. You saw him, Marjorie said. Just too late to prevent it, but early enough to stop the worst. Laura blinked hard and nodded. Upstairs, Sophie was at her desk, laptop open. A thick textbook beside her titled Intro to Civil Law and Litigation. A yellow notepad was covered in scribbles, trial vocabulary, evidence chain notes, a diagram of courtroom roles. She paused to rewatch a video clip of a mock trial, then jotted something in the margin. When she heard the teapot whistle downstairs, she smiled. From her drawer, she pulled out her own copy of the binder. Smaller, thinner, but carefully built. She'd titled it, What Justice Looks Like When It Lives With You. Helen was the one who poured the tea. Cinnamon ginger, she announced. Best for post-trial inflammation. Marjorie chuckled. You've missed your calling in herbal law. Helen set 2 mugs on the living room table and settled beside her. This couch feels less cursed now. It never was cursed, Marjorie said. It was just waiting for the right story to sit on it. Helen raised her mug in salute. To boring mornings. Marjorie clinked hers gently. To quiet ones. Elaine arrived late in the afternoon, coat still draped over one arm, paperwork tucked under the other. She looked less like a lawyer today, and more like an old friend who just happened to win a war. All final, she said, placing the envelope on the coffee table. Restitution enforcement order. Civil penalties confirmed. Asset freeze extended indefinitely. You won't have to see or speak to him again. Marjorie picked up the envelope, held it like something fragile. You're sure it's done? Elaine gave a small, sure nod. He's not your shadow anymore. Marjorie didn't cry. She just breathed. I'll file this, she said. But not tonight. Good, Elaine said. Tonight's for tea. That evening, the house moved like breath. Soft, slow, alive. Sophie read on the couch. Laura in the kitchen washing 2 mugs without being asked. Helen hummed under her breath from the front porch swing. And Marjorie stood at the living room window, watching dusk roll in across the lawn. Light spilled through the trees, amber and warm. A neighborhood boy rode past on his bike. Somewhere, a dog barked once, then stopped. Marjorie touched the window frame. Gently. The world outside had not changed, but she had. And so had the house. She turned back toward the room, the women, the books, the tea still steeping, and whispered to no one in particular, "Safe again." The podium was simple. Oak, polished, 2 microphones, neither of which Marjorie had touched yet. Behind her, a projector screen read, "Justice in the Margin, Elder Fraud and Financial Exploitation." A community response. Below it, her name, in bold, Marjorie Clark, Advocate. The auditorium was filled. Not grand, but full. Rows of silver-haired attendees in cardigans and pressed slacks, alongside college students with laptops open and fingers poised. A quiet, reverent hum threaded through the air. Elaine sat in the front row, arms crossed with pride she didn't bother hiding. Helen sat beside her, wearing her nicest scarf and mouthing, "You got this," from across the stage. Sophie was on the aisle, notebook on her lap, phone set to record. She'd offered to introduce her grandmother, but Marjorie declined. "I've waited long enough to speak," she had said. "I'll take the mic myself." Now she did. Her voice came soft at first, but clear. "I used to think fraud only happened to people who lost track of things, people distracted, sloppy, lonely. I didn't know it could happen to someone like me." She looked at the audience, made eye contact with no one and everyone. "My name is Marjorie Clark. I'm 71 years old. I spent 30 years keeping other people's books clean. And then, one night, my own started bleeding." The room hushed further. "I got a call just past midnight from the police. They said my name had appeared on a suspicious loan application. At first I thought it had to be a clerical error, but it wasn't." She paused, let the silence stretch, not for drama, but for gravity. "It was my son-in-law." Greg A. Ripple moved across the room, not surprise, but recognition. Too many knew the name, or someone like him. "He forged checks, used my social security number, took money from my accounts and gambled it, all while living under my roof, sitting at my dinner table." Smiling, Marjorie reached into her bag and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Unfolded it carefully. Not her binder this time, just a speech, typed, annotated, real. She didn't read from it, she simply held it. "I'm not here because of what he did. I'm here because of what I did." After a quiet rustle of notes being scribbled, phones lifting, recording. "I hired an attorney. I worked with police. I documented everything. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. I didn't burn the house down. I filed." She smiled, just a little, dry, sharp. "I built a paper trail long enough to drag a predator into daylight, and I did it with help. From my granddaughter, from my oldest friend, from women who refused to treat silence like safety." Sophie sat taller, eyes glassy, and eventually, I sat in a courtroom, binder closed, jury watching, no yelling, just facts, just math, just every lie he told, lined up like columns that wouldn't balance. The audience was silent but leaning in, each body forward by an inch. "Justice isn't about vengeance," Marjorie said. "It's about balance, and I know balance." She placed the folded paper back down, tapped it once. "Because I keep the books." For a moment, nothing. And then the applause started. Small at first, then growing, rising. A standing ovation, not the polite kind, but the collective exhale of a room that had been holding its breath for too long. Marjorie didn't cry. She nodded once, walked off the stage with her shoulders straight, cardigan neat, hair pinned just so. Not triumphant, not dramatic, just steady, just unbroken. Helen met her in the wings, tears she would never admit to, wiping quickly with the edge of her scarf. "From victim to voice," she said. Marjorie glanced at her granddaughter still on her feet, beaming from row 3. "No," she said. "From invisible to seen." Elaine passed her the event folder. "That recording? It's going national. Advocacy groups are asking for copies. They want you on a panel next spring." Marjorie only smiled. Let them listen. Later that night, in the quiet hum of the hotel room, Sophie sat on the bed uploading the full speech. She titled it, "When the Bookkeeper Fights Back." Below the title, a single quote, "Justice is balance, and I keep the books." And as Marjorie lay back on the hotel pillows, hands folded on her stomach, she closed her eyes and whispered the words she hadn't spoken since that very first call, that very first step into the unknown. And when I arrived at the station, I realized midnight was only the beginning of my fight and of his end.